one of the salient aspects of this week's Parsha, Shemini, the Torah presents in a rather elaborate fashion the dinim of the kashrus signs of animals, of fish, and the like. The Torah spends a fair amount of time devoted to this topic. And the reason is because the Torah tells us at the end of Shemini, Al tishaktu es nafshel seichem b'chol asheretz hashoretz v'lo sitamu b'hem v'nitmeisem b'hem. The language the Torah uses is language of v'nitmeisem. Chazal say, Al tikre v'nitmeisem ela v'nitamtem. That chas v'shalom, a person who's exposed to non-kosher food, B'achman l'tzlan, that could engender what the Gemara calls timtum halev. Timtum halev is a lack of kedusha. And therefore the Torah wants us to be very, very careful, exceedingly careful, not only in terms of that which we speak, but that which we ingest. That achila is connected to kedusha. And that's why the Shulchan, the Gemara says, the chagiga is dama lemizbeach, and certainly that which we offer up has to be l'reach nicholach. But the Torah also ends the Parsha Shemini with the following language, and this more or less sums up the entire description, the aforementioned description regarding kashrus. Ki ani Hashem amar la'eschem eretz Mitzrayim liyos lachem elokim v'yisem kedoshim ki kadosh ani, a passage that we're quite familiar with because of Parshas Kedoshim. Kedoshim tiyu ki ani Hashem Elokeichem. Here also the Torah says v'yisem kedoshim ki kadosh ani, because Hashem is kadosh, we are obligated to emulate the Almighty. Imitati Odei, Mahu Kadosh, Avata Kadosh. And the Torah continues, Zos Torah Sabeima V'Ov, V'chol Nefesh HaChaya U'Remeses B'Moyim, U'L'chol Nefesh HaShereses Al Haaretz. And the last pasuk in the Parsha, Lahavdil Ben Atome U'Ben Atohar, U'Ben HaChaya Ne'acheles U'Ben HaChaya Shelo Se'achel. One of the most important qualities that all of us have to acquire is the quality of Havdalah, the ability to make discriminating distinctions. And Rashi has a number of famous comments. And one comment of Rashi on this pasuk, Ben Atomi or Ben Atohar, Rashi indicates the Torah should have said Ben Chamor Lepara, V'alo Kvar Mefurashimei, Ela Ben Tmei Lecha L'Tahor Lecha. There are two different situations. One is, says Rashi, Ben Nishchat Chetzer Sholkana LeNishchat Rubo. The Gemara says in Chulin that with an animal, one has to shech two simanim, the kana and the veshen. With reference to an oath to a bird, one siman is sufficient. But the halacha is that ruba kikula. If one shechs rov of the siman, then one has slaughtered the entire siman, based on this concept of ruba kikula. So Rashi comments that this havdalah is critical, because there's a fundamental distinction between one who shechs chetzel shokana, only one half of the windpipe, l'nishchat rubo, to one who shechs rov. If one shechs rov of the kana, then one has shechted rov hasimin. And in the case of a bird, one siman is sufficient. In the case of an animal, we need a rov of two simanim. However, if one only shechs 50%, not 51%, then obviously one has not shechted the siman. This ability to make a very subtle, nuanced, discriminating distinction between chetzer shokana and ruba shokana is really the yesod of Kol HaTorah Kula. In the very beginning of Bereshis, when the Ramban describes the different verbs that are utilized by the Torah to describe the Bria, Ramban notes there are three terms that are very pronounced. Bara, Yatzar, V'asa. Bara means the Ramban Yesh Me'ayin. Hashem created everything ex nihilo. Yatzar, V'yitzar Hashem Elokim Es Adam Afram and Adama. Hashem created the Chomer, what the Ramban calls Chomer Hiyuli, hyletic matter. And for that hyletic matter, by Yitzer, Hashem took the Chomer and began the process of differentiation. And finally, the third term the Torah uses is the term Asa, which refers to Makeh B'Patish, the actual Tikkun. But there's another term that the Ramban notes also is utilized by the Torah again and again. And that's the term of Havdalah. The Gemara has an Avrei Psochim. The Gemara lists different types of Havdalahs. The beginning of Bereshis, V'yimavdil b'mayim l'mayim. Again, the beginning of Bereshis. Yihim Oros B'ki HaShamayim, the luminous bodies, the sun and the moon were created. Lahavdil ben Hayom ben Halayla. Again, to make Havdalah. Lahavdil ben Aor ben Achoshech. Keseda, the Torah utilized the term of Havdalah. The Gemara says that the reason why the bracha of Havdalah was inserted into the Shemini Esrei in the context of Chonin Hadas, it means Das Havdalah Minayin. If one does not have basic Das, one cannot make discriminating distinctions. So the beginning of Parshas, as well as at the end of Shemini, when the Torah tells us to be exceedingly careful and cautious regarding Simani Kashrus, of animals, of dogim, the Torah is telling us to make Havdalah. The Havdalah is really what defines or demarcates a Ben Torah from someone who is not yet a Ben Torah. In order to become a Ben Torah, one has to make very sharp, subtle, discriminating distinctions. One has to be able to make Havdalah between a minute before Shkia on Erev Shabbos and a minute after Shkia. The distinction between the two, in one case, one is someone who is not a Mechal Shabbos. In the other case, if one does Malacha a minute after Shkia, one is a Mechal Shabbos. Rav Soloveitchik Zatzal noted once the following: if I were to draw a picture, he said, and one were to examine that picture from a great distance, one would think that perhaps Rav Soloveitchik has artistic abilities, has artistic qualities. When one comes closer, one realizes that this is the work of a novice, not someone who necessarily is trained in the world of artistry. When one examines a Rembrandt, again from a distance, one will not perhaps notice all the subtleties used by the great artist. When one approaches the Rembrandt much closer, one sees the use of light and shadow, chiaroscuro, and all the other techniques utilized by artists, by great artists. That's the greatness of halacha. The greatness of halacha lies in the detail, lies in the minutia, lies in the pratim upirte pratim. And that's what the Torah says to us in the beginning of Parshas, that we have to learn to make Havdalah. And that's why many Mefarshim point out the first bracha, Birchas HaShachar, shenasan asech vivina, lahavchi beyom ve'layla. We begin with Havdalah, and the end of Shemini, which more or less sums up the entire Parsha, because here we have Shemini, the Miluim, Aaron HaKohen, and his children being inducted into Gehuna. That's also an element of Havdalah, of the tripartite Kedusha that exists in Klal Yisrael, and Shemini ends, Lahavdil ben Atomi ben Ator, and that's the distinction that Rashi draws between Chetzio Shel Kana and Ruba Shel Kana. Halavai, we should be zocher to absorb enormous amounts of Torah and learn with tremendous depth in order to be able to make these discriminating distinctions and thereby acquire the quality of Das. Because without Das, the main Das, Havdalah Minayim. The key in Torah is to be able to make Havdalah, to make discriminating distinctions, and that's why all of us have to become great Lamdonim and acquire a lot of Torah knowledge and make discriminating distinctions in order to be able to enhance our ability to come close to Hashem Yisbarach. V'yisem kedoshim ki kadosh ani. Halavai, that should be our mandate, that we should realize and fulfill the Korah Mamish.